straight. It's pretty compact, but it's pretty tight and twisty here in Valencia. Up braking into the first corner, needs to get caught out in cold conditions in turn 4 when you're on the right-hand side of the tyre for the first time on the lap. And of course, it's always top of the tyres as you approach the final corner on turn 13 and 40. 1, 2 and 8 are these braking zones. Welcome back to Valencia. Welcome back to our first ever round 22 in the MotoGP World Championship. A little bit later, we were expecting to get our final action of MotoGP in 2025 underway after a bit of a delay for track contamination in the Moto2 session. But better late than never. The final chapter of this record-breaking season about to get underway for the MotoGP pack. Under what are clearing skies, there's finally a bit of blue sky emerging after what's been a rather grey, overcast and gloomy start to this Grand Prix of Valencia. The 2025 concludes here this weekend and then we're straight into 2026. We're here with the one-day test on Tuesday, which we will be staying around for to bring you exclusive coverage of. Still a little bit of business though to tie off, a few loose ends to cover off in this final Grand Prix. Most notably, the battle for third place in the World Championship, which does look like it is going the way of our most recent winner, Portugal Grand Prix, the Marco Bezzecchi, winning for the second time this year on the factory and probably with a dominant start to each win last time out at the Algarve International Circuit. He's 35 points clear. Is Bezzecchi, a fellow Italian Pecco Bagnaia, so it looks like, to all intents and purposes, third place in the World Championship for the second time in 3 years is covered off for Bezzecchi. Of course, it's been a dominant season for both Marquez and Alex Marquez. 3 points separating Pecco Bagnaia and Pedro Acosta, potentially in that battle for fourth place overall. Matt Lewis still in the coach box, as always, with you for this season finale. Jack Appleyard down in pit lane, and it's great to see. How many times have we said this season? Another injury comeback beckoning, and for the final time carrying the #1 plate, his factory Aprilia rider Jorge Martin back in action since turn 1 of the Japanese Grand Prix sprint, Lewis.
And he said that the motivation to be here in front of a home crowd in Valencia, a sellout crowd on Sunday, was a large part of him wanting to come back this weekend. There were thoughts of potentially waiting until next season to make his return to action, but he dearly wanted to be here to experience this Valencia Grand Prix with the #1. His welcome back gift is a double long lap penalty. We're about to see the reasons why. It feels an age ago, doesn't it? The fourth injury interruption through Jorge Martin's 2025, if you include what happened before the first Grand Prix of the season in Buriram, piling into his teammate Marco Bezzecchi. Jorge Martin said yesterday when I spoke to him, he knew this penalty was coming, absolutely no arguments from his side, and he does say that it actually releases a little bit of the pressure off him this weekend. He doesn't have to worry about results, he can just think about laps, 2 of which will be through the long lap penalty on Sunday.
He knew the long lap was coming, he said straight away, look at that, immediately he goes for that right shoulder. Nobody knows his body more than Jorge Martin. He said straight away, knew the collarbone was broken. What he didn't realise was just how serious that right shoulder injury was. That muscle and ligament damage. Initially, I think Martin said to the media, say he was hoping to maybe just miss a couple of rounds, be back at the Australian Grand Prix in Phillip Island. So it appears to be, given the extent of that right shoulder injury, something of a miracle that Martin is actually lining up on the grid here this weekend. Mission #1, build some confidence.
has impacted the entirety of Vinales' season since then.
He has missed 8 Grand Prix so far this year, and the 30-year-old Spaniard, including the last 4. Amazing, really, having never missed a single Grand Prix through injury in his entire career. Good to have him back with us. While we're just covering off a little bit of housekeeping, well, we've touched upon the returning Martin and the returning Vinales. We do have a bit of an increased grid ahead this weekend as some of the manufacturers taking advantage of the option for wildcards to get some development mileage on their future packages. Augusto Fernandez is back for another play on the Yamaha V4 powered Wildcard M1, and also Aleix Espargaro is also back with us on the official package of Honda with one eye on 2026 as well. Let's go down to pit lane and say good morning to Jack for the very third time in this season 9. How are we doing, buddy?
Very well, thank you. Great to be here in Valencia Live, round 22 and 22, and already down pit lane. There was a little bit of an eye towards coming on Tuesday, which of course we find an exclusive on MotoGP.com. Alex Marquez did say yesterday to keep an eye on his garage because there was going to be something in there for him to try, and it is in fact the 2025 Aero package. Now, of course, that Aero package was tried and then put away by Pecco Bagnaia, was tried and then put away by Fabio Di Giannantonio. Marc Marquez, however, has continued to use it throughout the season. Nicola Buliga now using it as well, so it will be interesting. He's not out on it at the moment. He's got out on his standard GP24 machine with the GP24 Aero package, but will be interesting in this session for Alex to get some mileage under his belt on the 25 Aero, which is going to be a concept that we use for the GP26 when they roll it out on Tuesday, and just start that adaptation process. That's a big jump from 24 to 26 when he of course becomes the official taxi rider on the Tuesday.
Thanks very much, as always, Jackie. Alex Marquez does get the big promotion, the big upgrade next year. Staying, of course, with Gresini Racing, but he will be one of 4 riders on the full factory GP26 next season. He'll throw his leg up, sure, over a prototype new Ducati here, possibly on Tuesday. Just to finish off our housekeeping, we've done so much housekeeping, haven't we, throughout 2025. Nicola Buliga, as we knew, he was called upon to replace Marc Marquez in both Portimao last weekend. Actually did pretty well to the point on his MotoGP debut and his World Grand Prix start. Back here this weekend, and of course, I believe he's doing the test on Tuesday as well, so we'll be back on track with his former World Superbike Pro top track Vaz Gatlioglu, who will make his very first public debut on the Pramac Yamaha ahead of 2026. Vaz Gatlioglu has been private testing at a rather chilly and cool Motorland Aragon, I believe, over the last couple of days, where Augusto Fernandez was present. Of course, Augusto wildcard this weekend, and no great surprise, he was lauding the brilliant braking performance, the stopping potential of Vaz Gatlioglu, having looked at the Turk's data during that private Aragon test.
Yeah, he'll be here this weekend through the Grand Prix weekend ahead of that public MotoGP debut on Tuesday, even if it won't be the first time he's ridden that Yamaha MotoGP machine. And completing the wildcards, Aleix Espargaro is also here this weekend on board the factory Honda. Aleix has just got up into the top 7 on a 132.2. Of course, a weekend where Honda could shed some of the concessions that they've been enjoying in 2025. If they score, or the leading Honda rider across Sprint and Grand Prix scores 9 points this weekend, which is the equivalent of either a sprint second place or potentially 7th in the Grand Prix on Sunday, the Honda will go up a level from D to C in concessions, which means that they won't be able to test in between Grand Prix with their race riders, only test riders. They'll lose some of the engine development, engine freedom they have available to them, and also the extra aero upgrade through the season. So plenty to play for Honda. To admit, when I spoke to him yesterday, he's quite keen to lose those concessions because it'll give him some extra time off between Grand Prix.
It's clear lately Honda have been pushing the bounds a little bit on that RC213, the 2 mechanical DNFs, which when was the last time a Honda rider, a factory Honda rider as well, had 2 mechanicals which were all mere out of the sprint and in the Grand Prix. Both were apparently clutch related, I'm reliably informed. Not the same issue, but clearly Honda are experimenting with some clutch updates lately. Tomcat Chantra, of course, also had a clutch issue throughout the Portimao weekend. Luca Marini was a retirement with a clutch issue in the Japanese Grand Prix lately, and also we saw 2 spectacular engine blow-ups, didn't we, for the Hondas, the factory Hondas as well, at the Phillip Island Grand Prix in Australia And again, a typical spike inside HRC was saying that was nothing to do with high mileage, end of season high mileage on those motors. It was because Honda clearly seems at the moment are just starting to maybe drop their conservative approach. They really are starting to get a bit more aggressive in some of the developments, and that can out sometimes at the cost of reliability.
So in a way, don't you? Because so often the ethos and the culture, I guess, has been that they don't want public failures, because I guess they reflect badly on them, but you have to take risks, and this is one man who wants his particular cap to take some more risks. And mechanically, Fabio Quartararo on what looks set to be the swan song, the farewell for the inline 4 Yamaha as we go before the V4 takes over for next season. Followed with Mayo Merigara yesterday, who was talking their chances down, it's fair to say, in the first part of next season, which they still expect to be spent developing the V4 before they go for big results in the second half of the season. Those are words which will not particularly ring very well in the ears of Fabio Quartararo.
6 last weekend in Portimao, just his top six finish of the year for Quartararo. Yamaha this season have just had 7 top 6 finishes. The 26-year-old has scored 6 of them, he said, throughout that Portuguese Grand Prix. Was at a tail of 2025 really, as far as the Frenchman is concerned. All single longed in with a lack of grip and a lack of power. He just has to revert into defensive mode. What could Fabio Quartararo do in the 2025 Swan Song? Let's go back down to Jack. There's been a bit of a KTM tech update. What's going on, Jack?
Yeah, just outside Brad Binder's spot. Quite interestingly, his bike hasn't, the second one that's sat in the box, hasn't got any rear aero on it, which to show direction before Tuesday's test. Of course, it was a mid-place finish in Portimao. We managed to ride through the field quite impressively, and an interesting spot in the back of the garage. Danny Pedrosa is in there as usual, but he's all in orange for the very first time. Top right, former crew chief, Helperton, is in the KTM box ahead of his move into Brad Binder's side of the garage on Tuesday for 2026, with Enea Bastianini confirming to me in Portimao that it will be Andres Madrid, the man that's been alongside Brad ever since he moved up to MotoGP, moving across on Tuesday for Enea.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jack. Unfortunately, as you were mentioning, Brad Binder, as you can see on your screens live, he's just taken a tumble here as the South African. This is a real common crash, isn't it? As you're decelerating down from 5th gear, you go to the high-speed left-hander of 7, as soon as you grab the brake for turn 8, 3 gears just down to 90 kilometres an hour for that tight left-hander. Binder, so often we can see in these cool early morning conditions, Binder has been caught out. As Jack mentioned, it was a real strong ride, with 5th place over the line in that Portuguese Grand Prix last time out, in the 3rd top 6 of the season with the man league. We've seen Binder inside the top 6, and Jack was saying that at the moment he hasn't a bike without any rear aero. Well, he was relieved of some by Frankie Morbidelli, wasn't he? On lap 1 in Portimao last weekend.
Yeah, despite all that, it didn't slow Brad Binder down too much, did it, in the end? So, the KTM's still experimenting with various upgrades. I don't think they've necessarily been inspired by Frankie Morbidelli's aggression a couple of, a week or so ago. Jorge Martin then, this was pre-run, he's now back in the box. Martin did say, in the build-up to this return to actually said, if I do feel pain this weekend, I will stop. One thing he has learned through this season, of course, is to listen to his body. Marc Marquez gave him that advice midway through the season when Martin was out following that Qatar Grand Prix crash. The season has been interrupted on so many occasions by so many injuries, and he did say that the injury to his shoulder, as I outlined earlier on, way more serious than he thought at the time. He has continued to clean the hard yards. He's been over at the Red Bull Performance Centre over in Austria to try and help his rehabilitation to, and one thing he dearly wants is to be able to go off for his Christmas holidays in one piece.
Yeah, 2025 has been a write-off really as far as Martin is concerned. At least what he has been unfortunately watching on the sofa, he's been able to see an approach that's very competitive when he is back to full health. Getting a welcome weekend off. I think of all the people that were happy to see Maverick Vinales pass before this Valencia Grand Prix weekend, it was the very busy Pol Espargaro who has been standing in at Tech 3 KTM and, as always, doing an absolutely phenomenal job. Top 10s in Brno, in Hungary, in Red Bull, Phillip Island, and last weekend in Portimao. We bumped into Pol in the lift at our hotel in downtown Valencia last weekend, and he was just saying, I've had enough of the race. I love racing, but I just need a little bit of a weekend off. Apparently, Danny Pedrosa I think he's been in Aragon as well, that private MotoGP test, putting in some development miles on the 2026 prototype RC60. And positive news, because Paul told us that Danny was so happy, KTM was so happy with the updates that he tested, that Paul no longer required his participation on Tuesday here as a post-race test. He'd been headed to Andorra immediately after this weekend's action. So yeah, that all bodes well as far as Pedro Acosta and Brad Binder are concerned.
Keeping a close eye on their progress on Tuesday as well. In case you're wondering, on Maverick Vinales, if Maverick Vinales at any point does withdraw from this weekend due to the injury he's just recovered from, now that he's been entered and has competed in this Valencia Grand Prix weekend, there is no obligation for KTM or Tech3 to replace him, which is why Paul Espargaro can sit there safe with the knowledge that his services won't be required this weekend.
Good to see Ralph Fernandez back in action. Of course, we saw him briefly last weekend in that Portuguese Grand Prix before he had a real nasty crackle exactly in this session 1 week ago. Damage to his left shoulder and upper arm. Did, of course, try and continue throughout the weekend before he was withdrawn on Saturday morning. They decided, well, it was best just to rather than risk further damage, further aggravation to that left arm injury throughout the Portuguese Grand Prix weekend, we'll call it quits and get him as fit as he possibly can for this weekend's action in Valencia, and perhaps more crucially as well. So many riders have got one eye on that Tuesday test, haven't they, as they throw their legs over some experimental 2026 parts. So Ralph Fernandez back in action, and we found a beautiful actually tribute to Helmer here this weekend, dedicating it to the Valencia community. Of course, it is wonderful to be back here for the first time since 2020. It's really wonderful to be back in this fantastic city. Of course, it is just over a year ago since the devastating floods which cost so many lives here in this part of Mediterranean Spain. We know, of course, the Aspar team was based here. They did so much for the relief effort, raising €300,000. MotoGP itself, of course, this time last year, we raced in the Solidarity Grand Prix. We raced for Valencia, and there was a big effort, of course, to donate so much of the proceeds from that final Grand Prix in Catalan last year. €1.5 million was donated by MotoGP to the relief effort. So combined, the MotoGP community came together for the Valencian community to contribute almost €2 million to the relief effort. And of course, we continue to send all of our thoughts and prayers to Valencians, and it's just great to be back in this city and seeing that life seems to be thankfully getting back to something like normality.
Let's head down to pit lane with Jack, who's with Paolo Vanora with him on the back of an extraordinary victory for Marco Bezzecchi in Portimao last weekend. So rather pleased Paolo now, speaking to Jack.
Yeah, he is indeed. And of course, pleased to see the return of the number one in the box, Jorge Martin. Although I'm just looking as he finishes that first run, and it seems to me, Paolo, that the injury a little bit more complicated than I think we all thought it was. His dad, Ankel, there having to help him put the gloves on. He's clearly not 100% yet. So what is the plan for the weekend as a result of that?
Absolutely, you're absolutely right, Jack. It is, yeah, first of all, we are so happy to see him again in our garage. But to be fully honest with you, he is not at 100% of his potential. It seems to me that the injury is worse. So he requires more time. Again, it is the first time that he joined one motorcycle after the injury that he suffered last time, and yeah, and he didn't try even a production bike. The years before the standard training his bike, so it will be not easy for sure, but we are so happy to have him in the garage, and the goal for this weekend only to get the rhythm with the MotoGP in order to be not ready, but at least
Marco is about to leave over the right-hand shoulder. I'll just wait for him to jump on board. I can hear you a little bit more clearly, Paolo, because right now Marco is actually in the best form of anybody on the grid. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but it looks to be the World Championship three victories more than any other MotoGP season. It looks like you guys are starting to build a lot of momentum. It's all heading towards you, fighting for the World Championship
What did you say? We are superstition, no?
Superstitious.
Superstition. Yeah, you are fully right. Despite of the we are so happy about the job that we did. All of the team members did a very great job, and we would like to thank also the guys in Noale, in the factory, in the Tele factory, because they are the season, long season, but we would like to keep this momentum. We would like to thank the energy of Marco that never. Also during the season there was some special moments in particular in the second part of the season. But don't forget that we suffered a bit during the struggle, but it was the normal way to join another ride, another bike, sorry, and another team. So it was everything under control. It was inside one plan. At the end of the year, seeing in the backward, it seems to be that we did in a great way, and we hope that we create the basis for the next year. I would like to be very polite with you. I don't want to say everything much more than this, but to be fully honest with you, our goal next year
If you finish third this year, then the goals are only. Let's hope that you guys are in that World Championship fight. Well, we've got a round this weekend, so let's hope we can finish off with yet more success. Thanks, Paolo.
Thanks to you.
Thanks, Jack. Great, as always, to hear from our pretty boss, Paolo Venora. What a 2025 the Nuali factory has achieved, as Paolo mentioned. So much money working behind the scenes that we don't see at the factory in Nuali. His most successful season in terms of the Grand Prix victories. Two the Reds, one for down there. It's going to be the first time this season looks like that Aprilia rider will finish top three in the World Championship. And Marco Bezzecchi currently locked and loaded in that third place, 35 points clear at Bagnères, which is actually amazing. It just shows how good Bez has been in the second half of the season. He wasn't on a sprint podium until round 10 in Assen on the same weekend when he was second in the Grand Prix. He'd only been his Sunday podium prior to that, so round 10, Bezzecchi had one sprint podium and two Grand Prix podiums. Yet here he is now, third in the World Championship. It's been a sensational second half to the captain. I think it just took him a little bit of time. New team, new bike, new pressure, new expectations. In that factory Aprilia team, certainly not helpless, having to shoulder the burden of all the early season development without Jorge Martin. I mean, the second half of the season, as mentioned, with Jack was talking about Paolo Venora, there's no question about this. Bezzecchi looks like if this carries on, isn't he alright hanging the backside for the market for the next year?
Yeah, Aprilia might not publicly be saying it, but they've got to be thinking hyper challenge next season. Of course, we'll never know ultimately how many of these races Marc Marquez could and would have won had he been here. Ultimately, he wasn't, and that's part of the game in MotoGP, as Aprilia know all too well with Jorge Martin absences throughout the season. A big step that Aprilia made through this season with their qualifying performance and their ability, or part of the technical ability in particular, to get a qualifying lap out of that Aprilia. We didn't see Bez on the front row of a grid until the sector, and that was a wet qualifying section for before back in Germany. He's had 6 front rows since then, including 4 pole positions, which has then given him the opportunity and the platform to use the race pace, which I think has been there through much of the season. He's just been putting it into practice with way too far back on the grid in the first half of the year. Now he's qualifying at the throne. He's got the pace to stay there.
You can see this new rear tyre graphic being demonstrated to us. First time getting a look at this from Pedro Conti. You can just see the lean angles, and you can just see the surface temperature and the configured parts of this Valencia circuit. Interesting, wasn't it? The highest surface temperature on the rear tyres, 160 degrees. It's turn, well, drop down through turn 13, full gear, you're going through about 175 miles an hour. It's the classic Valencia showing you when you see the power sliding, the rear tyre's going to generate some heat. So if you're down through 13, if you break that into 40, well, we're going to get the biggest surface temperature. See that left-hand side of the tyre from glowing red when Acosta gets into that final corner. You just saw it there as the temperature started to climb as he came through the infield section. And now he's going to start climbing up toward turn 30. He'll go through 12, about 125 kilometres here at the curve on the inside. And now this is just about time management. Well, the quickest corners for time there is where I'm mixing struggles. Look like there goes the red glow. And that's where you'll get the highest temperature around this Valencia circuit. 9 left-hand corners here at the Ricardo Tormo track. 5 right, and one is I mentioned just over 4 kilometres in length. A real stadium atmosphere here this weekend. I mean, it doesn't really matter where you sit in this Valencia circuit. You'll manage to pretty much the whole track.
And what, of course, that does also achieve, as you saw there, is the other side of the tyre, the right-hand side of the tyre, needs to cool down, which can also cause some problems when you're on the right-hand side of the tyre next, which is through turn 4. Jeff, back down to you.
Yeah, just a quick update from the Yamaha team. Paul looked at Fernandez, as you remember, weekend, the third time in full competition mode. Now, when it was last with us, some of you guys at home might remember that we showed some images of an adjustable piece of carbon on the chassis so they can adjust the flex and try and find a direction with that chassis to be able to move forward. Now, that has gone on both bikes this weekend. It looks as though the we'll try on Tuesday, but again, quite alarming here. Jack Miller was saying that even for the test on Tuesday, throughout this weekend, they still won't have dialed up. Miller saying that he believes it's going to be the year. Yamaha still not comfortable, firing up to the 100. I think that we'll see. So, day 1 of round 1 in Thailand. Now, obviously, Fabio Quartararo has spoken at length over the past couple of weeks, the past couple of months about how he needs the top line right now. With Yamaha still trying to piece together the direction of this V4, but we might see some pretty warm faces in the Frenchman's side of the box come Tuesday. Hope not, but all of the indications in Jack Miller trying to right now expectations in terms of lap time. It looks like it's the case that Quartararo might not be best pleased with the fact that
When we've seen that new V4 raced in competitive action in the hands of Fernandez in Misano, most recently Malaysia, the most startling observation is pretty easy to see if you look at the top speed charts. They clearly are being ultra conservative in terms of how much power they feed into that new V4. Just looking now, the speed charts down, one is just around 900 metre start finish line here. Augusto Fernandez, once going through the speed guns, is getting outgunned in 324.34 kilometres. Is the best from Fernandez so far in this morning session. Now that is 14Ks, just over 14Ks though. The Luke Marie's factory Honda, relevant to some of the other Yamahas out on circuit. Well, the goal there is one place ahead of Fernandez in the speed traps, about 1.5Ks faster. So too is Fabio Quartararo. I'm surprised, I must admit, I thought they'd start sort of putting a bit more horsepower in that engine now.
I understand that it's much like we talked about Honda earlier on. Friday did a couple of works. Remember they had one when they ran the V4 Misano on the Friday. We saw Augusto Fernandez pulling over at the side of the racetrack during FP1. You don't want that kind of thing happening, but ultimately this is a game, this is a sport where you've got to take risks. Conservatism doesn't often win you Grand Prix or win you World Championships. And Quartararo is going to want to see something tangible that gives him confidence that he can genuinely put his faith onto the Yamaha going into 2027. He's going to have to make that decision at some point next season. Something John discussed this on Gear Up yesterday in terms of what Fabio Quartararo will do next season. If he makes a decision to stay with Yamaha in the first part of next season, he is purely guessing that they're going to get there with the V4 rather than actually knowing that they're going to get there. I guess any decision you make regarding rider contracts for 2027 is going to be a guess to a certain extent, given the change in the regulations. But there's not an awful lot from the Yamaha point of view to fill Fabio Quartararo with an awful lot of confidence and hope. He is riding out of his skin at the moment on that inline ball, but he seems to be spending every single racing lap in 2025
silver bullet. But if they've got any hopes and prayers of keeping on the road beyond 2026, they have to show them something that's a significant step forward in the early part of 2026. Otherwise, Fabio's made no bones about it, hasn't he? He said, well, I'll have to, for the sake of my career. You know, I've been patient. I've stuck with Yamaha since he made his debut in the MotoGP Championship back in 2019. I almost get the sense, maybe now is just the right time for Fabio Quartararo to seek a new challenge, a new adventure. Maybe also just move to a European team. He knows how Japanese factories work. He knows how the Japanese projects work. Maybe just go and try something completely different. I mean, there could be a big reshuffle for the grid, couldn't there, for 2027? And as Lewis mentioned, Pedro Costa talked about this, because he keeps getting asked loads of questions about, even the same boat, the KTM going through, what will the Costa decide to do in 2027? And as he's talked about so much, well, it's a bit of a stab in the dark. You're taking a bit of a punt wherever you go in 2027, because, of course, the capacity gets reduced to 850cc engines. Perhaps more significantly, you move over to Michelin to Pirelli tyres. I mean, who's going to come out the gate quickest on the new Pirelli rubber era?
I might feel that with what we gather might well be some increased front grip with the Pirellis, that maybe will bring things back towards them. If they're looking for some positives, and we will do our best to find them. Gustav Fernandez has put in a 1:31.6 this morning. Gustav Fernandez is in 17th. He's 7/10 of a second off the pace of Alex Marquez at the moment, and with no disrespect intended to Gustav Fernandez, here he is on the V4 Yamaha. He's a Moto2 world champion, was titled over here back in 2022. But Fabio Quartararo on any motorcycle is generally going to find a 2 to 3 tenth minimum step forward. So the actual lap time that he's setting at the moment is not too shabby. Here he comes out the final point. This could move up to the top 10 when he completes this one. It's clearly lacking some top speed, but over the lap it's not too slow. Gustav Fernandez moves up one place with a loss of time in the final sector, and he's now within 6/10 of the pace.
Quartararo will not care what they call that Y-Star M1 next year. Don't care what colour it is, he just wants a fast bike. I mean, he keeps talking constantly about more grip, more power. That's what we need from the Iwata factory. And as always, they're around this tight and twisted Valencia circuit. It means the lap times are very, very tight. Down from Alex Marquez in the into the session, 1:31.884. There's not even a second covering the top 22 down to Nicolo Booga. And fair play to Jorge Martin. I mean, this is once again a bit of an exercise in blowing off some cobwebs. As Paolo Bonoro said, Jorge Martin has not touched anything two-wheel related since that crash in Motegi. The only two-wheel action Martin's had since Japan has been riding around this Valencia paddock on his scooter. We know Maverick Vinales has been riding 600 and 1000cc production bikes to get himself ready. Martin blowing some cobwebs up, and he's only just over a second off the top spots. Just before we head back down to Jack, a little bit of breaking news at Mercia yesterday. It's good news if you're a Thai Grand Prix fans, because it's confirmed that we'll be returning to the Chang International Circuit in Buriram until at least 2031. Once again, Thailand will be our host venue for a much anticipated season opener in 2026. Let's go back down to Jack.
Yeah, a bit of a small issue. Outside the top 15 at the moment. The first bike just had a small bit of smoke pumping out around the and then the second one, when he went to start it, seemed as though there had been some kind of issue. They had the side bearings off, and it looked as though they were working on the both bikes at the moment are needing some repair work. Bagnaia in the back of the box with helmet and gloves on, ready to go, but unfortunately neither of his motorcycles are, so not the perfect start for Bagnaia.
Thanks very much, Jack. What a rider, I can wait to see the back end of 2025 is going to be Pecco Bagnaia. Just referencing once again the lap times, and now there was less than a second covering the top 22. There was not even half a second splitting the top 12 down from Alex Marquez to Brad Binder, who we saw take that early tumble at turn 8. Alex Marquez and Morbidelli at the moment, the only two riders that have found laps in the 1:30s. Frankie Morbidelli, I think, on notice once again. I believe he was called up to meet the FIA MotoGP stewards yesterday, just for a little chat about his over-aggression on the first lap of turn 5 in Portimao last weekend. Actually, on Frank, it's good to see him fit here this weekend, because when you saw that contact with Enea Bastianini, he had a real nasty whack on his left shoulder and a big bump on his head. Frank actually was able to conduct any of his post-race duties. Now he did have to go to a local hospital, of course, just because Street CT scans, all given the A-OK. At the moment, up into P2.
One thing we do know is Frank Mordelli knows exactly the best way to ride a Ducati GP24 because he's now done 2 full seasons on it. Having started last year on the GP24, stuck with it for this season, having moved across to the VR46 and the sole factory spec bike, current spec bike being given to his teammate Fabio Di Gianantonio. So Frankie Morbidelli will have a change of machinery for next season. He'll go on to the GP25, which has had mixed reviews this season, depending on which of the riders you speak to. Pecco Bagnaia certainly won't be sad to see the back of it. Marc Marquez, of course, has done plenty of winning on it.
Since turn 1 of the sprint in Japan, straight back into the groove, a 131.923 from Marti. As mentioned, just over a second he is back off now of Alex Marquez. If you compare it to his teammate Marco Bezzecchi, well, it's just over half a second. It just shows how quickly he slipped back into race mode. Jorge Martin, we did see though, as he was leaving pit lane for one of his stints in this session, just grabbing and just manoeuvring that right shoulder. This will be a pretty uncomfortable weekend as far as Martin is concerned. I suppose what a place to come back to. Valencia not too bad, only 5 right-handers for him to contend with. Jack just confirming Alex Marquez is a little play on the 2025 Ducati era.
Quartararo now makes his way towards the line. 9th becomes 8th. He's now within 3/10 of the pace. He is the leading Yamaha in the session at the moment. It's Ducatis 1, 2 and 3. The Hondas 4 and 5. Sean Zarco ahead of our wildcard Aleix Espargaro, showing that he still has plenty to offer. He's been testing all over the world this season. Most recently he's been testing at Sepang and of course at Aragon. He now gets to play in Valencia at the moment. He's just 3,000ths of a second away from being the top Honda this morning.
Yeah, the entire MotoGP field, less Marc Marquez unfortunately, will be testing here on Tuesday, as we mentioned fairly repeatedly over the last few weeks, because we want you to join us for the first actual 2026. Yamaha also actually, it shows how desperate they are to get some good mileage on the V4. They privately rented the Valencia circuit for some Wednesday testing as well. Yamaha will be here for both Tuesday and Wednesday. We will be here on Tuesday, myself, Lewis, Jack and Ellie and York. But by the time the Yamahas take the circuit on Wednesday morning, we will be long gone and ready for our Christmas break.
Yes, and we'll be hibernating until the beginning of February when myself, Jack and Elliot are heading over to Sepang to bring you some coverage of pre-season testing in Malaysia in February. Of course, Yamaha's point 2, they will be the one remaining manufacturer with concessions available to them if one do get the required result this weekend. Of course, pre-season testing, we have a test in Sepang, so preceding that is the shakedown test, which if Honda do score 9 points with their lead rider this weekend, will be available to the rookies, Diogo Moreira and Toprak Razgatlioglu, test riders, and the other Yamaha race riders. Of course, Toprak already eligible, but Tuaro Winter Miller will also be eligible to take part in the shakedown test. And of course, we also test in Buriram the weekend before the first Grand Prix of next season, which is at the very end and very start of February, March. Season weekend before that, we go testing in Buriram on the Saturday and Sunday before we all get underway again for 22 more rounds of this MotoGP World Championship.
Guess what? Guess who's top KTM once again here in Valencia? It is, of course, Pedro Acosta. Still in with a shout of 4th place in the World Championship. It wasn't that long ago. He was almost 80 points. 4 or 5 Grand Prix ago, he was 80 points behind Bagnaia in the title chase. That's the beautiful shot that we always love to see here in Valencia. Power slide in the KTM through turn 13. Really has took some top form of late, hasn't he? Acosta 4 sprint podiums in the last 5, 3 Grand Prix podiums in the last 4. Now there's no bias in this commentary box, but I would love actually to see Pedro Acosta win this Grand Prix on Sunday, because apparently he's been having a little bit of a chat with Danny Pedrosa. He's been leaning on Pedrosa's experience, knowledge, for a bit of advice, much more, he said, in 2025. And then apparently it's emerged that Danny Pedrosa said to Pedro Acosta, if he wins the final Grand Prix here in Valencia, he's going to have to dye his orange KTM. So for that reason alone, I really want Pedro Acosta to win here in Valencia.
Well, we don't advocate race fixing, but if we did, that might be a reason to bring it in. It does a Grand Prix, to be fair, when Pedro Acosta could pull that off. He needs to qualify well. This is the kind of circuit where overtaking is fiercely difficult. It is a tight and twisty circuit. There is only really one long straight KTM is when it goes in a straight line. So, yeah, Pedro Acosta can qualify in the front row, which he finally did for the first time of the 2025 season in Portimao, as Jack Miller launches himself to the top. Would safely assume that he's got some fresh rubber in to put in a 1:33.82, and maybe, just maybe, Pedro Acosta can pull it off. If he does, he will of course be the 7th consecutive winner at the end of his 2025 season. Incredible.
It is worth noting as well that this is KTM's most successful Grand Prix circuit in terms of podiums. They've had 5 previous podium finishes here previously, including their first ever one, thanks to Paul Espargaro in what was an incredibly wet 2018 Valencia Grand Prix. Let's go back down to Jack for an additional Yamaha update.
Yeah, we've spoken already about one of the high-profile changes when it comes to rider crew chiefs next year with Phil Marron. Well, the other one is the move of Alberto Giuliano to become top rack Gasly Opera's crew chief in 2026. It's quite interestingly and quite comically. Obviously, Andrea Dovizioso is in there helping out, of course, as part of his role as Yamaha test rider and trying to right next to him as the pair go side by side and begin to work together again. Of course, the partnership that they had for the fight, the Marc Marquez. So good to see the pair of them working together. This time not in red, but in blue.
Thanks very much, Jack. I'm not sure those sentiments will be echoed by Enea Bastianini, of course, who was moving on in 2026. I mean, it was a very abrupt ending to their relationship at KTM. Unfortunately, hate me for saying this, but Enea's had more crew chiefs and podiums in 2025. Yeah, of course, it is a mouth-watering prospect. So Billy Holmes will be with us for over 6 hours of live coverage at the test here on Tuesday. Lots interest in Diogo Moreira's move up to LTR Honda, most likely as our new Moto2 world champion. He's 24 points clear of Manu Gonzalez in that particular battle with just 1 round remaining. But I think everybody cannot wait to see the public debut of Turk Toprak Bazgatlioglu, the box office star of World Superbikes for so many years, a 3-time hat-trick of World Superbike titles for Bazgatlioglu. Yeah, I hate to say somebody's crashed here. Somebody has gone down the road here late on in Valencia. Just over 5 minutes of this FD1 session ready. It's burning out again.
He's at turn 8 again. We see the marshals running outside of our front trucks. We've seen down there with GP and burning out again. That bike's made it all the way to the tyre barrier.
Because you can be motoring through there, through 7. You're up to 5th gear, about 250 kilometres an hour. That's actually the infield section. This is going to be, this is turn 4. Text the front then going through turn 4. There's Alligator. That went really late, didn't it? Maybe you just went back on the power there, just took a bit of weight off that front end and Alligator. Then let's have a listen.
Just as he feeded the power back in, didn't he?
Yeah, just as I said, it was as he picked up the throttle and just took that little bit of weight off the front end, and Alligator goes down. Of course, it was in that turn 4 here in 2023, and we had the collision before MRT and Marc Marquez, which I didn't really play decisive in the outcome of the championship, but it certainly made it life a little bit more comfortable for Bagnaia in that final Grand Prix of 2023.
Actually, earlier on in the session, when we saw that tyre temperature graphic with Pedro Acosta, see, that was, of course, demonstrating the rear tyre, but of course, same as applying to the front tyre. The temperature in the right-hand side does drop a little bit, of course, when you're on the left-hand side of the tyre through turns 13, 14, 1, 2, and 3, before you're back on the right-hand side for turn 4, which is why that corner is so problematic.
Yeah, there's not a Grand Prix rider on planet Earth that has not had a front-end crash going through turn 4 here in Valencia, particularly in the sort of holiday sessions. And we pick up ValenciaGP, picked up a good time. He got second as the HRC test rider, 1:30.707. Back once again, I think this afternoon is a special helmet design. This is all a tribute to his wife, Laura, who's always a constant companion. For the 36-year-old, this will be Grand Prix start number 344 for ValenciaGP. So yeah, just a thank you to his wife Laura for many years of support, being at Alicia's side, of course, mother to the twins Max and Mia. very popular on Alicia's
Yeah.
social media channel. But if you do follow them at home, perhaps you get as much of their time as what Alicia does on the social media these days.
There's extensive car collection too on social media. I'm sure that caught the attention of a few of you. Certainly the envy of many of us in this Grand Prix paddock. There's Mr. Fernandez, fellow wild card, who is 680. So Miller, Spargo and Raul Fernandez have all made late improvements. So certainly saw from Miller, he was on brand new medium front and rear. Raul Fernandez, as you can now see following your screens, is on a brand new medium rear tyre, a used soft front tyre. And Alex Spargo also with some fresh rubber to lift himself up into second place. The fastest rider before those late injections of pace and some fresh rubber was Alex Marquez on a 1:30.884. He's now back to fourth.
Good little picking me up after his Portimao injury dramas. This for Raul Fernandez at the moment on course for third place. He's also in the high 130s. So the team had completed this session for Fernandez. He said yesterday he's pretty much 95% full strength after the real scary crash that he had down the hill into turn 2 in Portimao. He said it was one of the biggest crashes of his Grand Prix career. He's had a few when you think about some of the people we've seen testing of late in Mandalika and in Sepang. But he's up there inside the top 3. Check on some other big names. Pecco Bagnaia, who, as Jack reported, was having a bit of a tough old start to a tough 2025 in general. Bagnaia's best work this morning at 1:31.528. That's left him down in 20th position. But Bagnaia, as always, is doing a lot of work on more tyres. His best time coming on lap 5 of 16.
Sure, it doesn't take much in 2025 to make Pecco Bagnaia fans panic the way the season has gone, but I don't think I'll be panicking at this stage with Bagnaia down the order. I go as well as on the order. He's also put in some fresh rubber. He now climbs up to third, so it's now third and fourth for the Trackhouse duo.
Good ride last weekend in Portugal. We're from Ayagura. It was a very good ride, actually. Let's not do a disservice to him. It was a 7th place, 8th top 10 finish of the year. So he just spent a little bit too long trying to find a way through on John Zarco, who was very resilient on that LCR Honda. So had he maybe got through on Zarco 3 or 4 laps earlier, and there may have been something for him late on to hunt down Fabio Quartararo. Couldn't pick off both Frenchmen late on in Portimao, but another very, very solid performance from Ayagura. Martin negotiating his way through turn 6. He will be finishing most likely this session in last place, but positions immaterial, aren't they, right now? By the way, Martin, this is just about sick time because there's been such a lack of 2025. Just a confidence-building mission this weekend and that their Tuesday test. To be fair to him, high 131's a very respectable pace, given we haven't seen him since Saturday in Japan.
This is his 18th lap of the morning, and it might well be his fastest, as you can see on screens. He did joke yesterday, given the double long that he's got this weekend, he might not even bother doing any time attacks this weekend and just essentially treat this as a public test session. I'm sure Martin will have a go at a time attack, because that's one of the areas on the Aprilia that is taking in the longest to truly get on top of. Coming from low qualifying positions to pretty good race results in the last part of the season. As Ayagura climbs another place, takes second from Alex Spargo on his last lap of the session, down to a 1:30.705. So it's Pramac, Yamaha, Trackhouse Aprilia, Honda Test Rider, and Trackhouse Aprilia, your top 4. Which certainly has pleased Alberto Puig to see a Honda in the top 3.
Yeah, good job by Alex Spargo. Hardly a novice around this Ricardo Corbo circuit. This is his 21st Grand Prix start here in Valencia. He's only finished higher than 7th though in the previous 20, not the particularly happy hunting round as far as the veteran Spaniard is concerned. Just taking to the perimeter road on the outside of turn 8 is Maverick Vinales. Vinales ending that session in 19th place. He did 18 laps, so our returning walking wounded top-notch Spaniards, Vinales and Martin, both did 18 laps across that session. Dave Bagnaia, not exactly a confident and happy march to be back at the factory Ducati garage. 21st Bagnaia and P1 here in Valencia.
Marco Bezzecchi himself, the other rider, who of course is in that battle for third in the World Championship this weekend. Bezzecchi was only 18th himself in that session. Of course, he didn't entertain fresh rubber on the Factory Aprilia at the end of the morning. 1:31.364 for Vez, 1:30.3 for Jack Miller, who's going to be one half and perhaps even entertaining teammate pairing in 2026 when he's partnered by World Superbike champion Bob Baccarat. The Miller fastest giving something for Yamaha to smile about on this Friday morning in Valencia.
That was only last weekend, and my memory is absolutely shocking. But didn't Jack lead away in FP1 in Portimao on Friday afternoon? I mean, I know it's only 7 days ago, folks, but I'm getting old, and it's been the longest season in Grand Prix history. Oh, well, there's still a little bit of the old grey matter that works. No, I'll take it. Miller then it is that leads 130.382. Less than a second, eventually ended covering the top 18. As always, super tight sessions here in Valencia. On the badge on the tour line with Yarnes, just over a second. They took on Miller at the end, and Ace Spider, and then inside the top three. Of course, we're going to get the customary practice start session coming up next. Lacia's really good, isn't he, at sectors 1, 2 and 3. Just look how much he's struggled. Sector 4 is clearly the area where Honda have got to identify some progress. Long corners, once again, it's still around some of those sweeping long sections, which Ramir was talking about here yesterday, where the Honda still does suffer. So perfect illustration there in that final sector, which does include that long tire sliding turn 13. And Lacia Sparrow giving up a quarter of a second in that third split. Full split.
Awfully sorry to rain on the parade as well. John was third in last weekend. He was awfully close in fairness to him. But I think he entertained us, if nothing else, with his jumps over the two-minute rest. Last weekend, Alex Marquez and Marco Bezzecchi with a 1 and 2 in FP1 last week.
Damn you, Alex Marquez and Marco Bezzecchi. Oh, well.
Close enough.
I thought, so the grey matter that I thought was working, that is nuts. Hey, Harry.
Far wrong in fairness.
Yeah, I was close. I was close. Only 2 places out.
He won it on style points in the end with his jump over turn 8. And Jack Miller does end this morning P1. Where were the other Yamahas in that morning session? Augusto Fernandez on the V4 version 10. Quartararo 14th. And of course, Miguel Oliveira is farewell full-time to MotoGP here this weekend. He was 22nd. Alex Rins 15th as we see him now leaving. There was so much emotion for Miguel Oliveira last weekend. Before the Grand Prix even got underway, he was already in tears. Of course, with the ceremony involving his family, all the national anthem was performed, which certainly did the heartstrings of Miguel Oliveira and those watching from the commentary box. This will be the full-time ride of the 117th final MotoGP appearance.
Yeah, he said last weekend it was like a 100-kilo weight was lifted off his shoulders when he took the checkered flag. And after all the stress, all the pressure of the build-up to his final home Grand Prix, then dealing with all the extra attention of the Valgard International Circuit Clash, he said this weekend it was like a walk in the park. He wished Miguel Oliveira and Sonket Chatra, well, with all the success in their new adventure over the Autumn White Paddock next year. So we'll take the start session then about to events here in Valencia. Right that by Val Fernandez for Frankie Morbidelli's fifth. They beat themselves up pretty badly in that Portuguese Grand Prix last weekend. Of course, it's going to be an incredibly emotional weekend down in Red Bull KTM Tech 3 because after 4 decades in the paddock, stepping aside and handing over the reins to Gunther Steiner in 2026 will be the boss of Hervé Fonchar. confirming Alligator. He's looking on an onlooker from pit wall. On one bike, and the two bikes not quite ready, or they're just probably the bikes were really will be out in this session more than likely. Alligator finished in 11th place, finishing in the gravel as well at 8th.
There watching on from the pit wall, expected to be a busy man on Tuesday as well. There's had been a replacement for Mark Marquez until the end of the Williams for the Bombillion in that session. He was 23rd, 1.3 off the pace as we have a look here at the pressure start from Tecco Bagnaia, which wasn't particularly great either. Pedro Costa following suit.
Spargo then, KTM test rider. He's been able to keep ally, hasn't he, both on and off the track. As far as Pedro Acosta is concerned, he knows, of course, Paul Spargo knows better than anybody, just the brilliant performances of late of Acosta. Well, an unwanted spectator at the end of this country star session, at least he's going to get an insight into he might be on that long run down the first corner. To Roy Martin, apparently fully away from the start line.
Team's got the cost of the pit wall there, so how he ended up on that side of the racetrack. I think we might be about to see it.
Yeah. Join you fringe trimming here in Firmine as back on the ground. Off the smoke there.
That kind of scare at this stage. It's what Martin he's at.
Yeah. Maybe the goal out this weekend is just to make the Firmine Alligator. Also a little bit of a goal approval there. Chancellor, look at Pedro Acosta. Is it going to be take two much better as far as Acosta's concerned? It certainly is. That's more like it. That's the thing like everything. With the ball working order. Should have got the push-up device engaged there. We saw the front wheel just pop straight up in the air. Not quite as dramatic and severe as from Gap Chancellor's wheelie coming out the final corner over the crest. It pulled him out last weekend. St. Mammoth Vinales has not had much recent seat time on that KTM Tech 3 machine. It was a brilliant practice start from Vinales.
Comes Fabio Quartararo, who I don't think he has tactic failure by pulling onto pole position as the Yamaha sinks closer to the ground, about getting the best possible launch away. Crawls all over that M1 to keep himself as low as possible. Pretty good launch too from the number 20. You're practicing the start there, but you're practicing where you're going to break the first into turn one, which has often seen trouble as you scrub off speed down from just over 200 miles an hour down to around 80 miles an hour for turn one.
Miller back in then after what's been a very successful start to our season finale here in Valencia as far as comeback Yamaha are concerned. It was 12 months ago. Was comeback Ducati when they had the best day. Best weekend of their existence. Over at the Circuit de Barcelona, Catalunya, Roy Martin was crowned our 2024 World Champion. Not before seeing all the troubles, all the trials and tribulations that were going to come his way in 2025 as he moved over to the factory of Trinity. Beautiful start that Alex Marquez, who just keep the podium, the 29-year-old Spaniard, doing some banging to secure in second place in the World Championship. 12 Grand Prix podiums now this season for Alex. He had one. He had just one last year, a historic one at the Sachsenring in Germany, when he saw the podium with brother Mark. First time that had happened in an awful long time, 1997, over in Imola. 26 podiums in total so far for Alex. Has reverted a little bit in some respects back to Mr. P2 of late, aside from that Malaysian Grand Prix. Last weekend, second place in the Portuguese Grand Prix was his 19th runner-up spot in 2025.
It's also there from his practice start. Every rider has their own various procedure, their own way about going about it. As starting in MotoGP, Alex Marquez stays on very late, doesn't he? And then drops below the ball of his Ducati.
Costa ending the session in 8th place. Once again, as it has been sold this year, at the top KTM, he could end up this season double the points tally for this teammate Brad Binder, across the 285 points collected so far, as opposed to Brad Binder 145. excellent start to the final Grand Prix. And as far as Jack Miller is concerned, he was out, as you can see, at that third run, 7 laps he completed on a fresh set of medium Michelin rubber. Got to make it work, got to make it pay. And Jack certainly did the business. 1:30.382 saw him take the spoils here in Valencia at FP1, at the lane FP1. Just over 3 tenths of a second clear of Maduro in second. Wide on Fox Valencia Spargo. The season campaign here in Valencia, top 3 on the moment. RT213V Honda. 2 track outs of Pulleys inside the top 4 with Val Fernandez in fourth spot.
It is just across the 8th edge. Antonio Augusto Fernandez, top 10. The V4 Yamaha out again. Next up for Marini Zarco, Quattuaro Rins, and Binder. And there, Bastianini 17th there. Marco Vincent Ultimate with it. Maverick Piaggio returning.
Lars did well in 19th place. Miller then starting the session with the soft front medium rear tyre, and then when he switched late on the medium combination, the 7-lap run he found a 1:30.382 to lead the way.
Medium initially for Agura, and he put a soft front tyre in the end, as well as a second medium rear to take second.
Valencia Spargo also on his third and final one of the session, went up to fresh rubber, and he made it work at 1:30.7 in those 7 race top 3.
And Ralph Fernandez didn't change front tyre, or not the final, but he did on run 2. Brand new medium rear for run 3, got him down into the 130s to take P4.
About sector time, absolutely nailed that first sector with that fresh rubber, 10th of a second clear of Miller.
Yamaha running a Honda in sector 2. Miller fighting us through there.
Honda looking good in sector 3 on that tight infield section. Valencia Spargo just a whisper ahead of Miller, and Augusto Fernandez with the Yamaha V4.
And Jack Miller fastest in the final sector, the only sector which features a Ducati rider in the top 3.
Well, we're underway then in our final showdown of the 2025 MotoGP World Championship. After the 2026 starts here in Valencia on Tuesday, with opening of the count here on free practice 1 on Friday. Good morning to comeback Yamaha star Jack Miller, leading the field away. He tops our final Friday morning/afternoon action of 2025.
Bye.